Did you ever get caught up in the details, maybe lose the forest for the trees, maybe get bogged down with nitpicking on something rather than just looking at the big picture? We're going to think about that today on Now at Devotions from Trinity Lutheran here in Cyrus. It is an absolutely beautiful morning here. Fall colors are starting to pop. There's bean chaff and wheat chaff and all kinds of chaff everywhere in the air. Folks are drying stuff and harvesting and doing all the things. And it's fall in Cyrus. And we are in the book of Luke, chapter 17. But also I'm going to think a little bit about 2 Timothy today, chapter 2. And there's this thing that happens in our texts this week in all three of our stories. We have the story of Naaman in 2 Kings, where Naaman's got a skin disease, but he's a powerful general for an enemy army. And one of his slaves is a slave girl from Israel. And she says, well, she should just go find Elijah, and Elijah will make him better. And he does that. And Elijah says, well, go get washed. And Naaman says, well, I thought you'd do something fancy, but you just want me to go jump in the river? I'm not going to do that. And his people say, go do it. You'll get better. And he does, and he gets better. But he nitpicks. He gets fussy over the details. Well, the same thing happens in 2 Timothy, and Paul writes about this. In fact, in the Message paraphrase of this section of 2 Timothy, Paul says to Timothy, do not get caught up, and catch this phrase, in pious nitpicking. Isn't that a beautiful phrase? Piety, I'll remind you, is like, it's our emotional response to spiritual things, right? So maybe you're in church and you have this feeling of intense of an intense spiritual moment, like when, for me, it's when we sing Silent Night on Christmas Eve, right? Like, I have a strong pious feeling right there, like I need that. And I have a piety about it. A piety is the thing where, like, I think we need to do that at Christmas. And if we don't do it, we're not doing something important. So I have a piety about that. But Paul, in prison, writes to Timothy, he says, don't get caught up in pious nitpicking. Don't we do that sometimes? We worry about how the story we tell about church or the story we tell about our faith, or we worry about how other people respond or the drama that's going on in a situation rather than just the outcomes, right? Like, for instance, in our story in Luke today, some lepers, right? Some folks who have a skin disease, which is incurable during Jesus' time. These lepers show up and they would have been cast out of the community. So remember, these guys would have been absolutely not able to live in their town anymore. They couldn't live at home. They were ritually unclean. So the priests would say, you can't stay here anymore. You have to leave for the safety of everyone else. And they would. They lost everything. And so this group of 10 guys comes up, and from a distance, they say to Jesus in Luke 17, they say, Master. Notice that. They acknowledge him. They know who he is, and they think he has something to offer. They go, Master, have mercy on us. And he says, yeah, go present yourself to the priests. And you did that. You'd go present yourself to the priest when you were clean, and the priest would pronounce you clean, and then you could go back to your life. So he says, go off and show yourself to the priest. So they go, okay, and off they go. And on the way, they're healed. And one of them comes back. He says, I got healed. And he runs back and he says, thank you. And Jesus goes, what? Weren't there 10 of you? Where's the other guys? And ironically, of course, those guys went off to do what Jesus told them. They went to the priests. One of them responded. Now, here's the thing. Jesus healed them. And he says to the man, your faith made you well. And I would suggest to you that the faith that they had was to come and ask Jesus. They were crossing a huge set of lines to do that. They could have gotten a lot of trouble, honestly, and maybe cast out even further than they already were for approaching and getting mixed up with the normal people, right? So their faith was to ask him and acknowledge him as master and say, hey, please help. And so he says, your faith made you well. And he says that to the one man. Notice he didn't unheal the other guys, and he didn't condemn them or anything. He just says, good for you. Good for you. The response to God's action doesn't change God's action in this story. Naaman's poor response to Elijah offering healing doesn't change the fact that ultimately he goes and gets healed. Timothy dealing with people arguing over their own feelings of piety, what it is they connect to at church or worship or with God. They argue about the different things. It doesn't change what God is doing. It just changes their story about it. I can say, oh, churches everywhere are failing and everything is bad and da-da-da. I can say that. Or I can say we live in a culture where we are changing our priorities rapidly and the church is changing too. And so the role the church plays in our society is different now. And there are lots of really faithful people who are doing the hard work of following God in a changing world. It's the same story. It just sounds real different. And this is what Jesus is talking about today. We can tell a lot of different stories, but God's activity is getting done. How do we want to talk about it? With gratitude or not? I'm Pastor Chris here enjoying the beautiful fall colors in Cyrus. Signing off for now.